Just when you think Washington state couldn't possibly go farther off the left cliff, they find a way. This time, they are spending 300,000 taxpayer dollars to fund a study for slavery and reparations. They want to find out how slavery is impacting historically marginalized people in Washington state. Today, we're going to dig into all of the details. I'm going to tell you everything that you should know about this study that's happening in Washington state. Let's head down the rabbit hole. Hey, everybody, I'm Julie Barrett, and I'm the founder of Conservative Ladies of America. And if you've been watching our YouTube channel for any length of time, you probably know by now that I like to geek out on legislation. I especially like to pour through these budgets that are usually over 1,000 pages because that's where they hide all the nitty-gritty garbage stuff. And thanks to the Seattle Times, today they put out an article about a reparations study that's going to cost Washington taxpayers $300,000. Now, remember, they just raised taxes in a number of different ways, and yet somehow they found $300,000 to use for this study of reparations and slavery. Now, as I was combing through the budget before it was signed by Governor Ferguson last month, I admit that I did not find this particular line item. I usually will do a keyword search for different topics that I think I might find, and slavery was not a keyword that I thought to enter because here we are in 2025. Why would we possibly be doing a study on slavery and reparations? Yet here we are. So let's backtrack a little bit. This actually started in June of 2024. Last June, the Washington State Democrat Party passed a resolution asking then Governor Jay Inslee to create the state's first statewide commission to conduct a study on slavery and reparations and remedies for the descendants of slaves in Washington state. Then, during this last 2025 legislative session, Representative Chipalo Street of the 37th Legislative District in Washington state was the one that put forward a proviso to conduct this study. In a newsletter in February, he said, "I'm excited to bring forth a proviso to initiate a study on what reparations for slavery would look like in Washington state. It's time that we take a deep look at the iniquities stemming from slavery, how our state established policies and institutions rooted in the practice, and consider what we can do to repair the harm that's been done. I have requested a proviso that would provide money for the state's Commission on African American Affairs to hire a qualified subject matter expert researcher to conduct the Charles Mitchell and George Washington Bush study on reparative action for Washington state's descendants of victims of U.S. chattel slavery. As the name alludes, this study would provide recommendations for how we might repair the harm done by U.S. chattel slavery. As legislators, it would then be up to us to figure out how we might implement those recommendations. This proviso and study would be one step forward in the fight to correct historical injustices." There wasn't a specific bill for this study. It was built into the budget that was passed and then signed into law by Governor Ferguson on May 20th. Let's take a look at what is included in this study. The study will include a historical analysis where they will take a compilation of studies that were done in Washington and Oregon territories from 1848 to 1889. They will review past and present discriminatory policies in Washington state. They will also do a policy impact review. This will include economic opportunities, education, and criminal justice disparities. They will also make an identification of current Washington laws that continue to harm descendants of enslaved people. Then they will give reparative recommendations. This would include frameworks for reparations at a state and federal level. Possible remedies that they have already identified include cash payments, investment in education, economic access, and criminal justice reforms. They would also do a cost-benefit analysis of these reformations for Washington state. And finally, the study would also include a health health and social equity analysis. What is that? That would be the use of social determinants of health framework from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to guide their recommendations. Now, their preliminary report of this study is due on June 30th of 2026, so exactly 1 year from now. They would give an interim report in December of 2026 to update any of their findings or add more to their reports. And then a final report would be due on June 30th of 2027, so 2 years from now, which would include their legislative policy suggestions for the Washington State Legislature. I've done a couple videos on House Bill 1696, which passed through the legislature and was signed into law by Governor Ferguson. This would create a reparations housing program. It expands Washington State's covenant home ownership program, giving forgivable loans to descendants of, quote, historically marginalized people. Their descendants had to have lived in Washington State prior to 1969. That particular bill is going to have a big impact on Washington State taxpayers. So to have this other study for $300,000 just for a study, you guys, we're not talking about any kind of policy. This is just the study alone. And you can guarantee that there will be a number of policy recommendations that come out of this study that are really going to hurt Washington taxpayers. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I do not believe that Washington can be saved at this point. I really do believe that Washington State is going to need to fully collapse before it can be rebuilt. All of these radical left socialist policies are just not sustainable. And you are already seeing a mass exodus of people in Washington State because they can't afford it anymore. Even if the politics are okay, they simply can't afford to be priced out of the housing market, all of the taxes that are going on. You've got crime running rampant across the state. The schools are failing children, and they passed House Bill 1296, which removes parent access from critical student education records in the public schools. So there's a lot of different policies being made in Washington State that are pushing good people out of the state. And you really don't have, and I hate to say this, but it's true, you really don't have any resistance by the Republicans in Washington State that are able to provide any kind of resistance to these really bad policies that are going on. And it's really hard to get common sense, Republican, conservative, just leaning a little bit to the right people who will want to run for office in Washington State. There's really not a lot of support for those candidates. The Republican Party on most county levels is really not helpful to candidates. And so it's really going to be difficult to turn this ship around the way it currently is. I do believe that we'll have to completely collapse before it can be rebuilt. And I know that there's people that are staying in and they're like, I'm fighting as it goes down and I will be here for the rebuild. And that is awesome. How long is that going to take? I don't know. It could be decades before Washington fully collapses. Time will tell and we will see. What are your thoughts on this reparations study? Do you think this is pretty extreme? If you're in Washington, I would love to hear how these kinds of policies are impacting you. Are you sticking around or have you had enough and you're looking to get out? If you're not already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and to our Substack, as that is the best way to get breaking alerts. Please give the video a thumbs up and be sure to share with your friends. Thank you so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.